9 times the speed of sound.
What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of I Hate This Engine. I'm alright. I'm good. Let's try that again. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. In today's episode, I'm going to try to yet again fix the broken 2-liter turbo in my 2010 Audi A4. Except for this time around, I'm not dealing with oil pressure issues. Now I'm dealing with oil burning issues. It's becoming a bit of a tradition on the channel for me to try and avoid paying thousands of dollars at a shop or the dealership or whoever to fix basic issues with cars that generally shouldn't really be issues with cars. These are things that manufacturers should be addressing under recalls or simple maintenance procedures, but they don't. So as an example, 2-3 years ago, we fixed my Audi Q5 3.2-liter engine, which was more or less done. It had broken a timing chain tensioner. So we replaced that without taking the engine out, saved ourselves thousands of dollars. After that, I was able to replace the hanger bearing on my Mercedes GL with a part I bought off of eBay for $50 when Mercedes themselves wanted to charge me, I think, $1,600 plus for the whole drive shaft, because for some unknown reason, they decided that the center bearing on the drive shaft should not be a serviceable item. So in the spirit of saving ourselves thousands of dollars without going to the shop, in today's episode, I'm going to try and fix the oil burning issues of my 2-liter turbo without actually opening the engine, without replacing any piston rings or anything like that. This particular car first appeared on the channel a couple of years ago. I bought it back in the summer of 2021 with an oil pressure issue. At the time, the seller said the car drives fine, but every now and then the oil pressure light comes on. I was looking to flip the vehicle. I did not need an extra carb. This was a manual B8. I actually liked the chassis. I liked the car. Low mileage is 166,000 kilometers. I've rebuilt plenty of these. This is my 6th or 7th B8. I've done with broken timing chains, blown up engines, all that sort of stuff. I bought this one because it was low mileage and because I wrongly assumed that an oil pressure issue is simply a sensor or the oil pressure pump or whatever. I bought the car for about $3,500, and by the time all was said and done with the oil pressure, I had spent about $2,500 to $3,000 on oil pump, balancing shafts, camshaft, cam bridge, timing components, and all that sort of stuff. So at the end of the day, the oil pressure issue ended up costing a lot more than I thought. And at that point, I was ready to just get rid of the car and move on. There wasn't going to be any profit in this, flipping the car. So truly, I was at a point where I had underestimated the build. I spent a lot of money trying to fix it. I got the oil pressure sorted out and wanted to get rid of the car. About a week after I published the second video, I put the car up for sale and I got a buyer for it. I didn't actually drive the car, which was my mistake. But like I said, this is not a daily and I did not need it. So it just kind of sat there. I knew it was fixed, so I wasn't too worried about it. The guy came in, we struck a deal. He bought the car and drove off. Unfortunately, the buyer called me at the end of the day and said that the car has developed a massive misfire and he wants me to take a look at it. Now, in all fairness, as I said, I hadn't driven the car, so it's entirely possible maybe one of the coils got loose or there was a cable problem. So I said, okay, that's fine, bring it in. I looked at all the obvious things, took out the spark plugs, checked everything out, everything was fine, cleaned up the spark plugs, put everything back together, car ran fine. Great. Called him back, he picked it up, called me back 2 hours later, said, hey man, car's got a massive misfire, I can't drive it, can you take another look? All right, this is clearly a little bit more serious. I brought the car in the garage, took most things apart, had a look at the injectors, had a look at the spark plugs again, coils, flipped everything else around, cleaned everything up, closed it up, car ran fine. Called the buyer, come pick it up. Doesn't seem like there's anything serious. Maybe just a dirty connector. He drove the car off, called me back the next day. Hey man, the car's got a massive misfire. At this point, we're done. I want my money back. I wasn't going to start arguing with the guy. Fair is fair. I didn't drive the car. Wasn't really making any money on it. So I said, okay man, that's fine. Bring it back. I gave him his money back. And that's when the saga started with this new engine problem. So I had fixed the oil pressure issues that I originally bought the car with, but now the car had a severe engine misfire on cylinder 2 specifically that made it more or less unusable. When I started digging in a little bit closer, I noticed sort of 1-2 major things that honestly I had noticed before that, but kind of ignored. I didn't think it was a big deal. But when I pulled up the spark plug for cylinder 2, the spark plug was very, very wet. So this is why when I cleaned it and dried it up and put it back together, the engine ran fine. Another thing I had noticed with the intake manifold off was that I had a lot of oil on top of the valves for cylinder 2. So my immediate assumption was that the valve seals for the intake valves on cylinder 2 were leaking oil. So I took a little bit of time, made myself some tools, and went ahead and did the valve seals on the engine. Now, there was no guide. I didn't have any videos to watch this, so I did a lot of it sort of by trial and error. But the overall process ended up being quite straightforward with some tools and stuff like that. But unfortunately, within the first 2 hours of driving the car, it developed a massive misfire and once again came back to the house. I couldn't find any online information about, a severe misfire on cylinder 2, and unfortunately, it's such a generic problem that, as you can imagine, most of the solutions were check your spark plugs and check your coils and all that sort of stuff. But the obvious clue here was the oil. I had so much oil in cylinder 2 that it was clearly fouling up the spark plug, and it was wet every time I pulled it out. So that was sort of the cause of the problem. And if you know anything about these engines, you will know that they suffer from massive oil burning issues. These relate back to the piston rings. I'm not going to get into the history of it. You can probably Google that up, or you've probably Googled it already if you're watching this video. More or less, the top 2 rings on the piston were changed to reduce friction, producing a lot of soot in the oil rings, which then clog up. They get, they seize up in the piston. They stop doing their job, which is eliminating the oil from the walls of the cylinder. To fix this issue the right way, what you're supposed to do is open the engine up, pull out the pistons and rods, replace the pistons actually, and the piston rings, put them back together, and hope for the best. This at any reputable shop will probably cost you upwards of $2,000 in labor, probably alone. When I priced out the parts with pistons, rings, all of the bearings that I had to replace, I think I was in the $1,500 range. But the parts weren't the problem. The problem was that I had to more or less pull out the engine or try to do it in the car, and this would have cost me another week, sort of part-time doing this. And all of this on an engine and car that I hate to begin with, and I want to get rid of. So I really, at this point, did not want to spend another $2,000 and a week worth of work to try and fix a car that I wasn't going to make any money on them, because frankly, there's just no value in these anymore. So I was in a pretty dark spot with this car. I didn't want to fix it. I didn't want to put any more money in it. I was technically okay with losing some money on it. At this point, I think I was about $5,500 in. I listed it below that, and I got a ton of interest, right? So, you can imagine it's low mileage, relatively decent price. But out of the 75 people that contacted me about buying it, I think one person actually came out and said, look, man, that's the piston rings. It's going to cost X amount of money to fix. So he lowballed me. He came in at like $2,500. I was like, no. I'm not going to lose half the value of this car. I've got so many new parts. So it sat for a while. I was pretty pissed off about it. And this is where the whole idea of piston soaking kind of came up. And that came up for a different vehicle. I found a couple of videos online with a chap dealing with a Toyota Corolla that was burning oil. And he was doing the piston soaking, and he was kind of documenting his results. The more I read about it, I found one post online that suggested that piston soaking might actually fix oil burning on an Audi, but it was it was buried in multiple discussions about oil burning on this engine. So it didn't really seem like a very legitimate way to solve the problem. Every single shop I spoke to said the same thing: pistons, piston rings, $2,000+. No professional mechanic suggested trying anything different. They basically said, oh yeah, burning issues, you're in for a treat. But like we already established, my whole goal in life is to avoid spending money on things that I don't have to. So I decided that at this point I had absolutely nothing to lose. So why don't we give this piston soaking a try and see if we can document it, perhaps help you guys out as well. Piston soaking is more or less the process of pouring down some sort of dissolvent into your cylinder and hoping that it will soften up the soot that's sort of blocking your oil rings, and then hopefully the oil rings will be able to seal up again and stop the engine from burning oil. while I was doing the research for the job, the Berrymans B12 came highly recommended for doing a piston soak. Now, this was not available in Canada at the time, so I had to order it from the US. I ended up buying a box of, I think, about 15, but unfortunately it took forever to get here. I think it took the best part of probably about a month before I was able to get my hands on this. So while I was waiting for it to arrive, I got bored. I went to the store and picked up a couple of other cans. Generally, are advertised as being able to do sort of the same thing. Now, you guys have probably heard of SeaFoam. It's a pretty famous engine additive. I noticed that they actually had a high mileage version of this, so I imagine this is a little bit more concentrated than the original SeaFoam. So I went ahead and picked that up because obviously we're dealing with a pretty severe issue with the motor. Now, right next to it, obviously on the shelf, they had another 4 or 5 different versions of this by different manufacturers. The STP brand, once again, motor treatment, was actually on sale. This was about half price. So I paid, I think, about 18 bucks for the SeaFoam, and I paid about $8, I think, something like that for STP. They should be just about the same thing. If you read the description, more or less says the exact same thing. It's probably the same chemical composition. That said, I was trying to figure out what the difference is really between these products. I've seen comparisons between SeaFoam and Berrymans. Generally speaking, the consensus online is that Berrymans is better at dissolving sort of varnish and soot and that kind of stuff. Folks have done long period tests over the course of a week to see really which one does better with dissolving valve deposits and that kind of stuff. As far as I can tell, the biggest difference between these two things is that this is a dissolvent. Okay, so this will dissolve paint. It actually even says it on the box. Be careful about painted surfaces. So this is a strong dissolvent, while the SeaFoam is some sort of a lubricant with alcohol in it to sort of help it clean up components. So as far as I can tell, this will be the strongest thing to loosen up those oil rings. But because it was not available for me in Canada, I decided that I'm actually going to go ahead and try the sort of lower performance products first before doing the Berrymans. So my plan right now is to start off with the STP, do a piston soak, and then go to SeaFoam, and then go to Berrymans. And depending on the results, this can obviously change. Both of these products are good for doing an engine flush, and they're safe for doing an engine flush. So actually what I'm going to do the first time in is I'm going to sort of do a mixed approach between these two before jumping into the dissolvent. So we're going to do the piston soak with STP. We're going to run the engine with the STP in the motor. We're going to dump the oil, and then I'm going to add new oil and a new filter and add SeaFoam to the crankcase and run the car for a longer period of time. So the piston soak will deal with the piston rings, and then after, with clean oil and SeaFoam in it, we'll sort of flush the engine over the next 400 or 500 kilometers. So let's start with these two, and then we're going to jump into the Berrymans if we have to. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and do the piston soak with the STP, see how that goes and what the results are after. The car's currently having the misfire, and taking the plugs out immediately, you can pretty much see right away what the issue is. This plug is wet. Now, it's not wet with fuel. This is not fuel, this is oil. The car doesn't even have blue smoke out the back. Cylinder 2's gotten so bad that it simply kills the plug and doesn't even bother at this time. Now, looking at the other ones, they're definitely not running well either. So these are black. They're not supposed to be black. They're very suited. So it's really not running very well at all. The next we want to do is you want to bring the pistons to the same sort of middle of the block. So you can do this 1,000 different ways. I'm using these two extensions that go right through the spark plug hose, and then you rotate the crank until the two of them get to the same level. Right about there. So right now the two pistons are about the same height. pull these guys out, and we are ready to pour in the liquid. There's about 450 ml per bottle of treatment. I'm just gonna go ahead and divide it equally, so about 110 milliliters per cylinder. All of the cylinders now have liquid inside of them. We're gonna let that cook for, I'd say, about 6 hours. And then I'm going to rotate the crank a couple of times to make sure the liquid has gone everywhere it's supposed to go. We're gonna let it cook for another 6 hours, rotate the crank again, let it cook for another 6 hours, rotate the crank again. I'm gonna put some paper towel on top to cap off sort of the holes, make sure nothing else falls inside, but also to sort of stop some of the evaporation if it's happening. At every rotation, I'm going to check with the scope just to see if there's any liquid still left on top of the piston. That way we can figure out, if certain pistons, are leaking more than the others. And if we have to, I'm going to keep adding liquid on top until we go with that. All right, so let's cap these off and let them cook for 6 hours. We are at 12 hours right now. At 6 hours, the liquid was gone. So what I did is I added a little bit more liquid and then rotated the crank 5 times. And we're gonna do the exact same thing right now. We're gonna leave a little bit for the 24-hour mark. Let's rotate the crank. All right, that's 24 hours. Let's crank up the motor and evacuate any of the liquid that's left over. You definitely don't want to hydrolock your engine, so do that before you put the spark plugs back in. Spark plugs go back in. Coils. And the harness. All right, let's start it and see what happens. So we had a pretty decent smoke out once I first started it. Feels like a misfire right now. I'm just gonna check if it's still cylinder 2. This was expected. There's a lot of garbage in the cylinder, so until it burns it all out, it makes sense that it's gonna smoke out. So we've got misfires on cylinder 1 and 2 right now. 3 and 4 are doing okay. 1 and 2 are more or less shooting about the same thing now. Cylinder 1 is the one with the lowest compression in the beginning. Cylinder 2 is the one that was constantly doing the misfire. So I'm not 100% sure what's happening here, but maybe we'll let it warm up a little bit and see if anything changes. After a quick cleanup of spark plugs for cylinder 1 and 2, the misfires are gone. So I think this was pretty normal. There was a lot of garbage inside the cylinder. God knows what came out of it. So I'm gonna let the engine run like this for about 15 minutes. That's sort of an engine flush. Might be able to take it out for a quick drive. And then I'm gonna change the oil and put some regular oil inside and see what happens. All right, the car idled for 15 minutes and I drove around for about 15-20 minutes, keeping it in second gear between 2,000 and 3,000 RPM. I didn't see any check engine lights. I did not see any misfires on cylinder 2. We pulled out the plugs. And the plugs are garbage. Don't pay attention to that. They haven't been changed. These are still original. I have a new set. I'm just trying to sort out the oil before I go ahead and replace the plugs. As you can see, 1, 3, and 4 all look the same. They all look pretty healthy as far as burning go. Number 2 is black. It's always been black, but the only difference with the plug now is that it's dry. So this is the first time I've ever pulled a dry plug. Usually it's covered in oil when it starts to misfire. So I'm a little bit optimistic that perhaps we're moving in the right direction. The next thing I'm going to do is drain the oil, change the filter, new oil, and put half a can of SeaFoam in the crankcase to continue the cleaning process. This is the oil that came out of the car. It's got about 50 kilometers on it. It's pretty dirty. Hopefully the cleaning solution has really helped things move along. All right, I've got new oil, new filter, and a half can of SeaFoam high mileage. Let's see how far we can get before the check engine light comes back again. All right, so I've gone through about 430 kilometers since the oil change. I wanted to go through a full tank of gas. I put fuel injector cleaner in the tank as well as the SeaFoam in the oil. I'll be completely honest with you. The results of this are somewhat unexpected. So at 430 kilometers, like I said, full tank of gas, the misfire is completely gone. So when I say completely gone, the car runs like a champ. There's no issues. The revs are fine. Everything is good. There's no smoking. I did not expect that. This car has given me so much grief over the last 2 years. Honestly, I did not think that a simple piston soak is really going to resolve the issues that I've had. I lost 2 buyers for this car because of this misfire. It was impossible to drive. Like when I say impossible, I do mean impossible. Within 20 minutes of starting the engine, you'd get the misfire and the car would just run on 3 cylinders. So after the first piston soak, I've got a car that's now done, coming up on 500 kilometers, and hasn't had as much as a hiccup for the entire duration. Now, as I said earlier, my goal with the first piston soak was to clean up the misfire, which we've clearly accomplished, but I did not expect the oil burning to disappear. So previous to this, the car would truly, in about half an hour, 45 minutes of idle, go through, a liter of oil. I've now driven it for 420 kilometers, and the indication on the sensor has only gone down by like a millimeter. That's not to say it's not burning oil anymore. However, with one piston soak, I believe, judging by how much has gone down, I believe I can get to 1,000 kilometers without hitting the bottom line on the oil level sensor. I don't want to be the guy that sits on YouTube and tells you that, I've done magic and you can save yourself thousands of dollars in doing something like this. But in this particular case, I'm not making this up. I showed you the misfire. The spark plug was soaked in oil every single time I've ever pulled it out. And now I've gotten to a point where in 500 kilometers, I haven't even burned any oil. Wow. I don't even know what emotions to have, to be honest with you right now. I was ready for this to not do anything and then just be disappointed and have to rebuild the engine. I was certainly not ready for it fixing all of my issues and bringing the engine right back to normal operating conditions. So I'm a little stumped. I'm a little confused by this. So let's do this. Let's go do one more piston soak. Let's check the compression. Let's check inside the pistons. Let's change the spark plugs with new ones and see what happens over the next 1,000 kilometers. All right, we're back in the shop. Like I said, we've done about 430 kilometers on this right now, about a full tank of gas. The oil level has clearly gone down, as evidenced by the computer, but that was very much expected. So we solved the misfire, and now what I want to do is I want to run a second cycle of the piston soak to try and perhaps solve the oil burning. Now, the oil burning is not severe enough for me to truly worry about it right now, but if I can get it to at least within Volkswagen spec, which is I think about a liter per 1,000 kilometers, then I'm a happy camper and I'm done with this car. Now, the oil that's sitting in the oil pan is a mix of 5W40 synthetic and SeaFoam high mileage. I was debating whether to drain it first or do the soak with it. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the piston soak with the Berrymans B12 on top of the oil that's currently in the system. As you saw earlier in the video, once the piston soaking is done, when you start the car, it burns, you know, it does a big puff of smoke, kind of runs a little rough in the beginning, and you pretty much drain the oil right after. There's really no point in me draining the oil right now, just so I can drain it after again. This oil only has about 400 kilometers on it, so I'm not too worried about it. With the SeaFoam and a mix of Berrymans, it's just gonna keep cleaning anyways. So we're gonna go ahead and do the piston soak again, this time with Berrymans. We're gonna run the car at idle and just a quick drive around for about 15-20 minutes again. We're gonna drain the oil, change the filter, put in new oil, and I think at this point I'm gonna try and actually record exactly what the oil consumption is. So the goal will be to drive 1,000 kilometers without the warning light on the dash coming on. If we get to that point, we're in good shape. So step one is before, level off the two pistons. So use these sort of extensions. They're sitting on a piston, so you rotate the crank until the two extensions are in the same spot. So now all four pistons should be at the same height, and more or less pour the liquid inside. As you saw with the STP, I use a jar here that's marked at about 110 milliliters, just so you can get about the same amount in each piston. There's a bit left in the can. I'm going to use this to add to the cylinders for every 6 hours when I rotate the crank like I did with the STP. You probably don't have to do that. You can probably just let it soak there for 24 hours, see what happens. But it's not a bad idea to allow the chemicals to kind of move in and out through the pistons. It will help you with the softening of the rings. Let's plug the hose to avoid any evaporation. And now we let it cook. So every 6 hours from here until tomorrow, I'm gonna keep rotating the crank and adding a little bit of liquid to try and attack the soot that's around the piston rings, try and soften it up and trying to clean it up. After that, we're gonna run the car and change the oil and put back normal clean oil. All right, boys and girls, I was pretty busy yesterday, so I couldn't start the car. So today marks about 48 hours since I've put in the Berrymans. I've gone through 2 cans while rotating the crank in the first 24 hours. This thing has been cooking slowly for 48 hours. I checked the internal temperatures, medium rare. We're pretty good. Spark plugs back in. Coils. So the piston soaking is done. I drove the car for 20 minutes with 2 cans of Berrymans in the oil. Like I said earlier, I'm a little bit afraid about leaving that longer in the engine. I did that with the STP, but the STP is designed to go into the oil. It is a lubricant of some sort. So with the Berrymans, although there are people online that run the car with Berrymans inside the oil, at this point we're really trying to deal with some oil burning, and I don't want to cause any more damage. Quick oil change. This is what's coming out of the car. So this oil has 450 kilometers on it. It started off with a half can of SeaFoam, and then I ran another 20 minutes with 2 cans of the Berrymans. Yeah, you can definitely smell the dissolvent in this. I wouldn't expect any less. We've got 2 cans of it inside. While the oil is slowly draining out, I'm going to get a new filter on. I mentioned I'm going to go with the Shell Rotella T6 for this oil change. Now, this is a diesel engine oil, so clearly not the specs that's required for this engine. However, as far as I know, the Rotella has a very high concentration of dissolvents in the oil, and it's meant for diesel engines to keep them clean. So I'm going to run the Rotella for the next 1,000 kilometers or so without any additives. I'm going to let the oil continue the cleaning process, and then depending on the consumption over the next 1,000 kilometers, I'm likely going to do another oil change and then put the regular 5W40 synthetic that I've been using for forever. So once again, you may or may not choose to do this step. You could probably do the exact same thing with the 5W40 and adding a little bit of SeaFoam. Obviously not a half can that's used for a flush, but add a little bit of SeaFoam to keep the cleaning process going. I want to give the Rotella a try. Can't really hurt anything with that. New filter. The oil capacity of the motor is 4.6 liters. There's 5 liters in the jug, so we're going to leave a little bit on the bottom. Then we're going to check the actual level against the MMI and the dipstick, and we're going to measure the consumption over the next 1,000 kilometers. New filter's in, oil's done. Let's check the compression before you throw the new spark plugs in, just to see if there's any effects of the Berrymans. For spark plugs, I'm going with the NGK Hyper Extreme Iridium. Regular Extreme Iridium is just not good enough, so we're going with Hyper this time around. And hopefully, when I pull these out next time, they're going to be nice and clean. That's probably the best we can do here. Let's close the motor up. Let's go zero out the MMI, check the oil level, and drive 1,000 kilometers and pray. Here we go. Engine's warmed up. Oil check's okay. We're full. So what I'm going to do now, zero the mileage. Drive and pray. Holy smokes. This is what April 4th in Canada looks like. Have you guys ever heard of freezing rain? Good thing I put on my summer tires. All right, as promised, I took the car for an extended drive at about 1,200 kilometers right now. Unfortunately, with the ice storm and us being without power for about 5 days, I had to pull the battery for my sump pump backup. So that obviously reset the odometer, so I can't really show you the actual mileage. So you're gonna have to trust me. I'm at about 1,200 kilometers. I just wanted to show you the oil level at this point. So after 1,200 kilometers or so, it does not appear that we have lost oil. Any oil, some oil. As far as the car is concerned, it shows full level on the oil. As far as I'm concerned, the results of this little experiment are satisfactory, to say the least. Astonishing, to be honest with you, because like I said earlier, before doing the piston soak, I could not drive this car for more than 10 minutes without losing cylinder number 2. And when I say losing, I mean losing. The engine would turn it off. Like, the misfire was so bad that the ECU would actually shut down cylinder 2 and I would just run on 3 cylinders. The fact that after the first piston soak, I got rid of that misfire after I had spent about a year trying to troubleshoot and trying all sorts of other things, was a win right off the bat. The fact that after the second piston soak, I don't seem to have any more oil burning issues is somewhat unbelievable, but there it is. Now we're going to wrap up this video here. There's really not much more I can tell you or show you about this, other than I'm more or less done with this car. I don't have any more work to do on it. I've spent 2 years trying to fix this motor, and it's time for somebody else to take it on and continue with it. But this is only one data point, and statistically speaking, hardly enough evidence that this service can fix your oil burning issues. So I'm actually going to repeat the exact same thing on my sister's Q5. I think she's got a 2011 Audi Q5 2-liter turbo engine. Exact same motor, exact same configuration. Everything's the same. And hers seems to be burning about 1 liter of oil every 400 kilometers or so. So we're going to do the exact same thing to the Q5. We're going to baseline the consumption, check the compression, do a piston soak. This time we're going to make it as simple as possible. We're going to do 1-stage piston soak and just right back to normal oil without all of the intermediaries that I did on this car, because she doesn't have any misfires or anything like that that I have to deal with. So we're going to verify whether this was a fluke on this particular car, or this sort of fix can actually work on more than one engine. And if it does, considering the cost of this is about $50, I think it may be a very good idea for you to try this on your car as well. So with that said, thank you so much for watching. If you like what you see, as always, click the thumbs up. If you want to see more, if you want to check out that Q5 video that's going to come in the next couple of weeks, click subscribe. And please let me know in the comments below whether you have oil burning issues, whether you have successfully fixed oil burning issues without an actual engine rebuild, whether you have any other suggestions for how the 2-liter turbo can be fixed, so to speak, without taking pistons out and stuff like that. And generally, let me know what your experience has been with your 2-liter turbo motor. It appears the couple of videos that I've shot on this car are the most watched on my channel, which doesn't really surprise me considering how common this engine is. But it seems like a lot of people are having a lot of problems. And if this is something that you're truly dealing with, perhaps there's something we can do to help. Let me know in the comments below. Do you have any questions? Do you have any other issues that you're dealing with? Maybe we can try and troubleshoot it together and push out some more videos to help other folks out. All right, that's it for today, guys. I'll see you next time.